Imagine your paycheck doesn't arrive for days, your office is told to shut down, and millions of people are left waiting all because Congress can't agree on a budget. That's exactly what happens during a U.S. federal government shutdown. It's a recurring drama that seems to play out every few years. But why does this keep happening? What's really going on behind the scenes in Washington? Let's dive in and break it down. The most recent major shutdown began on October 1st, when crucial funding bills failed to pass the Senate. Suddenly, so-called non-essential federal agencies closed their doors. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It meant thousands of federal workers were furloughed, sent home without pay. Others, deemed essential, had to keep working but with no guarantee of when their next paycheck would arrive. The costs quickly mounted, not just for the government itself, but for taxpayers and local communities who rely on federal support. So, what is it about the American system that drives this recurring problem? To understand, we have to look at the real costs, both financial and human. First, let's talk about the money. Government shutdowns are incredibly expensive. Long before a shutdown even officially starts, federal agencies have to spend time and resources preparing for it. They have to secure facilities, freeze contracts, and figure out which staff members to send home. This preparation alone is a massive, unproductive waste of time and taxpayer money. Contractors who do business with the government see this risk of disruption and often raise their prices to compensate, which means taxpayers end up paying more for goods and services in the long run. Then there are the ripple effects. States and counties that depend on federal funding are thrown into chaos. They have to scramble to cover delayed payments from Washington and are often forced to postpone essential services for their own residents. One estimate found that the 35-day shutdown in 2018 cost the U.S. economy about $3 billion in lost growth. But the cost isn't just economic. Think about the human toll. For individual workers, missed paychecks can be devastating, leading to real financial hardship. Beyond that, it causes immense damage to morale. Imagine being told your job isn't essential. It sends a powerful, demoralizing message that your work is undervalued. So the costs are very real, for the economy and for people. But that still doesn't fully explain why it keeps happening. To get to the heart of the matter, we need to look at the structure of the U.S. budget process itself. It's incredibly, almost ridiculously, complex. Back in 1974, a series of reforms gave Congress more power over the budget. While that sounds good in theory, in practice it split responsibility across numerous committees in both the House and the Senate. Now you have budget committees, appropriations committees, and fiscal committees, all with overlapping jurisdictions and competing priorities. This creates a recipe for delays, confusion, and gridlock. There's often a lack of clarity over who is responsible for what, making it easy for things to fall through the cracks. Another major issue is the lack of transparency in the process. For example, a huge chunk of federal spending goes to entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and disability benefits. The future costs of these programs aren't revisited every year as part of the annual budget debate, yet they represent massive expenditures that are growing over time. Also, unlike many state and local governments, the federal budget lumps together its operating expenses, the day-to-day costs of running the government, with its capital expenditures, which are long-term investments in things like infrastructure. Separating these would provide a much clearer picture of where the money is actually going. All of this means the system itself is practically designed to make shutdowns a recurring threat. But the mechanics are only one part of the story. Politics plays an equally big, if not bigger, role. At its core, a shutdown is a failure of political compromise. In a deeply divided Washington, political disagreements are constant. The budget process gives each party a powerful tool to use as leverage. For example, one party might threaten to block a funding bill unless it includes money for their own pet projects or policy priorities. The other party might do the same, demanding protections for programs they care about, like healthcare or environmental regulations. It becomes a high-stakes game of chicken, where each side is trying to force the other to blink. When trust between the parties breaks down, and when promises made during negotiations aren't kept, finding common ground becomes nearly impossible. Over time, these repeated near shutdowns and actual shutdowns have eroded public confidence in the government's basic ability to function. People start to see Washington as a place of perpetual gridlock and dysfunction. So, what you have is a perfect storm. a complex and flawed procedure, an institutional design that encourages conflict and intense partisan politics. Together, they create a constant risk of a shutdown. So, what can be done to fix this mess? Experts have a few ideas. One major proposal is to strengthen and realign the budget committees, giving them more authority to coordinate the process and enforce discipline. Another key reform would be to improve transparency over all federal spending, including those long-term liabilities from entitlement programs that are currently off the books in the annual debate. Separating the capital budget from the operating budget, just like many states do, would also make federal finances much clearer. Experts also suggest requiring long-term forecasting looking 10 years or more into the future for key expenditures. Right now, that kind of forward-looking analysis is rarely done. But here's the catch. All of these common-sense reforms would require bipartisan cooperation and political leaders who are willing to make tough decisions for the good of the country, not just for their party. For everyday people, a government shutdown isn't just some abstract political story on the news. It has real-world consequences. It hits paychecks, disrupts local services that people depend on, and chips away at our trust in the very institutions that are supposed to serve us. For federal employees, it's not just a financial hit. It sends a profoundly negative message about whether their work, their service to the country, actually matters. When trust in government falls, it has much broader consequences. People become cynical and skeptical of the entire system, and that weakens our democratic governance as a whole. Preventing shutdowns isn't just about saving money. It's about preserving the health of our democracy. Given all of this, why does it still keep happening? It's because the fundamental problems remain. The structural flaws in the budget process are still there. The political incentives still encourage brinkmanship, and meaningful reforms are incredibly difficult to pass in a polarized environment. So, what can you do? First, stay informed. Understand what's at stake. Second, hold your elected officials accountable. Ask them what they are doing to support responsible budgeting and reform the process. And when you vote, consider how your representative approaches these issues. Do they favor confrontation or compromise? These questions matter because shutdowns affect real services and real people. So, to wrap it all up, U.S. government shutdowns keep happening because of a toxic mix of procedural complexity, political gridlock, and institutional dysfunction. They cost taxpayers billions, undermine vital services, damage the morale of public servants, and erode public trust. Meaningful reform is possible, but it requires leadership and the political will to put the country's interests first. If you found this explanation helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the policies that shape our world, and share this video so more people can understand what's really behind the headlines. Thanks for watching and stay informed.